Welcome, everyone. We'll start off with some historical context. Where did political memes come from? George Bush's use of the term internets in a presidential debate in 2004 provided one of the first examples of a political meme. The citizen satirist responses to this Bushism appended to and sustained an existing prevalent public perception of Bush as technologically challenged and a bit slow-witted. The use of memes as satirical interventions in political discourse escalated during the 2008 US presidential election. The Obama Girl video was a feature of this campaign and kindled an image of the Democrat presidential nominee as a youthful, sexy, and thoroughly modern candidate. But this image isn't a meme in a categorical or teleological sense. It's a viral video. And here's a filler slide with a meme in joke. The definition of a meme is important because this presentation is about how the form has been co-opted by hyper-partisan publishers to drive a political agenda, and why this is dangerous for democracy and diminishes a graphic political satire practice that many scholars and commentators, myself included, have previously appended to the political cartooning tradition. So what's a meme? The Obama Hope image, which immediately became a graphic icon for transformative and generational change, is not on its own a meme. An image or video becomes a meme when it is disseminated and remixed or transformed by other users. In this way, political memes can, through collective engagement and messaging, emphasize or exaggerate various aspects of a political idea or individual. For example, images that ridiculed John McCain's awkward moment at a debate reinforced a narrative that he was too old and out of touch to be considered presidential material. And you can see how these images can manifest in the public consciousness beyond the online sphere. Fast forward to 2012, and the potential political impact of these images was again demonstrated when binders of women and Big Bird memes proved so damaging to Republican candidate Mitt Romney. These interventions, created predominantly by citizen satirists, favored the progressive side of politics and helped cement a perception that memes and the technological ecology in which they are produced and disseminated were a natural tool for the Democrats. This changed during the 2016 election race, a campaign that was notable for the emergence of alt-right memes originating in web communities 4chan and Reddit, Russian interference that was exacted almost exclusively on Facebook via the circulation of memes, and the social media savvy Republican candidate Donald Trump's retweeting of memes that solidified his base. Pepe the Frog, a comic character created in 2005, was appropriated by the alt-right movement as their mascot. Donald Trump's retweeting a caricature of himself as Pepe was therefore a very public expression of support for a group associated with white supremacy and hyper-nationalism, prompting alt-right leader Richard Spencer to claim that the alt-right was memed into existence. The production and dissemination of memes shifted from predominantly citizen satirists to various political and corporate players, most prominently hyper-partisan publishers, while at the same time the promulgation of extreme views via memes expanded the Overton window. It is something of an irony that a humorous image form that a short time ago was celebrated as a vehicle for amplifying and mobilizing minority voices to challenge hegemonic structures was instrumental in coalescing the alt-right form from an obscure online subculture into a legitimate political force. Hyperpartisan publisher Breitbart was at the center of the unregulated online networks that gave oxygen to ideas once marginalized as hate speech and birthed them as memes into mainstream consciousness through intermediation with traditional media. Almost inevitably, Occupy Democrats emerged as a progressive riposte to Breitbart's success. While the internet has presented cartoonists and meme makers with a diversity of alternative publication venues, the notion that we are running out of places to trust for information is symptomatic of the increasing fragmentation of these venues into self-selecting partisan audiences that diminish the self-professed core values of the satirical craft. The capacity of these sites to intermediate with traditional news publishers and drive the mainstream news agenda is alarming. Benkler et al. Reveal in their study of the 2016 election race that Breitbart was at the heart of a network of mutually reinforcing hyperpartisan sites, combining detextualized truths, repeated falsehoods, and leaps of logic to create a fundamentally misleading view of the world. And in this example, well, we know that Hillary Clinton was cleared by the FBI and that Bill Clinton and Loretta Lynch met on a plane. But Breitbart implies causality by putting those two facts next to each other, overlaid on a triumphant photo of Hillary Clinton that has nothing to do with the events referenced. Breitbart's caption to this photo is unprecedented corruption. There's no date on the photo itself, no attribution, and no context. We can see too that the graphic incorporates the same key formal features that distinguish the subset of memes known as image macros or captioned images. In the contemporary news environment, propaganda, advertising, and political memes share a common graphic vocabulary. Consequently, they can be difficult to tell apart. A key distinction between memes and cartoons beyond illustrative style is that cartoons are authored by a professional artist, with their authority or claim to truth engendered by the mainstream media context in which they are published. Memes are produced largely by anonymous partisan amateurs or commercial opportunists, their legitimacy implied by repeated online transmission and replication. The images that disseminate most successfully serve not to interrogate and reform the status quo, but to reinforce it. Gideon Mazambani et al. Conclude that memes spread more frequently within online forums when they are consistent with that network's group identity. Equally as problematic is that partisan content in the form of a meme is less likely to be corrected by others than when presented in a news article, and consequently, memes may present a highly effective vehicle for misinformation. Memes have come to dominate the social media space as participatory expressions of dissent, yet they are produced and disseminated in ways that have more in common with propaganda images and strategies than they do with cartoons. In the internet era of news and opinion consumption, trust has been transferred from familiar authors practicing in the regulated mainstream print media to truth-claiming images of unknown pedigree shared by friends on Facebook. Newspapers have long provided a venue for editorial cartoons that maintains a distal and semiotic distinction from propaganda images. As we lead into the 2020 US presidential election, we can see that hyperpartisan publishers publish satirical and propaganda images in their feeds as a seamless cascade or gallery mosaic, with these images sharing the same platform and similar material characteristics. For example, many of the images appearing on these sites are not memes by typological definition. That is, they are not remixed or transformed by several participants, but nonetheless incorporate the graphic vocabulary of established meme image genres as a kind of meme pastiche. They are characterized by readily discerned photographic or cartoon imagery, and often overlaid with pithy captions or labels in a condensed sans serif typeface, whose formal regularity makes it ideally suited to small amounts of text. They are easily produced and easily disseminated. Consequently, these images make attractive propaganda vehicles. The extent to which satiric parrhesia and political manipulation might be discriminated by news consumers is complicated by what Boehm describes as discursive integration, the blurring of discursive genres driven by the convergence and hybridization of new media. Furthermore, Wiggins points out that the structure of online spaces and the media that we use to express ourselves favors succinctly articulated, truncated meaning. Cooper argues that when information presented online is designed to attract attention rather than sustained engagement, it is readily falsified, and that social media's seductive sharing capabilities ensure that the internet public is highly culpable in the advancement of disinformation. Renner notes that images made up 5% of Breitbart Facebook posts, but accounted for 49% of most shared posts. Engagement with memes on social media increasingly positions citizens as agents for propaganda dissemination rather than participants in critical civic discourse. But what about humor? Applying various established cartooning and meme taxonomies in the analysis of newsfeed images published on the Facebook pages of Breitbart and Occupy Democrats in the lead up to the 2020 US presidential election, I categorize the images according to graphic form, humorous intent, and audience response. The intent of the publishers is clear: to leverage a popular form of humorous image to promulgate partisan messaging that is more closely aligned with propaganda than with the political cartooning tradition. As we can see by the orange bars in the graph, which denote images coded as humorous, satire assumes a substantial rhetorical function in Occupy Democrats' images, with this side of the sample revealing a close correlation between humorous intent and reception, which we can see in the grey bars denoting a laugh response. In explaining the lack of similar correlation in the Breitbart images, it is useful to consider the sample in terms of enthymematic engagement and rhetorical disposition. Just fixing some technical gremlins here, excuse me. That Breitbart readers inferred humor where none was apparent indicates enthymematic engagement. That is, the readers constructed meaning from premises that were implied rather than explicitly stated. Medhurst and D'Souza assert that enthymematic form is not only an inventional resource for the satirist, but also an interpretive resource for the reader. In this way, the reporting of information presents to some readers not as a conclusion, but a premise that invites completion of an enthymematic chain. The coding of the sample according to the rhetorical disposition forms of contrast, commentary, and contradiction reveals the persuasive character of the images and provides additional clues as to how readers might construct humorous meaning in the absence of humorous intent. The political persuasion of the audience is significant in considering the rhetorical impact of the images, as a reader's ideological and cultural memory influences the meaning they derive from enthymematic engagement with political content. For example, an image of Kamala Harris captioned with a quote from her Democratic National Convention speech is unremarkable until viewed through the narrative lens of the former Attorney General of California's past advocacy of policies that disproportionately disadvantaged African Americans. The image thus presents a contradiction to the reader, with the perceived hypocrisy mobilizing feelings of contempt or disgust that might then be given visible expression in a laugh or angry reaction. If we focus on the reader's reactions to this image, published alongside the right of the image in this slide, we can see that this image elicited laugh, angry, and wow reactions. And of the 18,000 reactions, 10,000 are laugh reactions, while just over 6,000 are angry reactions. And some of the comments confirm the contradiction inferred by the readers. Isaac Nayan Safati states that the capacity for social media to manipulate public emotions is reminiscent of the hypodermic effect, a model of communication describing the susceptibility of an audience to media manipulation observed most prominently in 1930s Nazi propaganda. Robert Fidian describes satire as a mode that activates the CAD or CAD triad of emotions: contempt, anger, and disgust. He notes that while these emotions can be mobilized by satire towards norm compliance, they can also be evoked to police reprehensible norms, as with contempt, further victimize victim groups, as with anger, and serve appalling as well as apt goals, as with disgust. When applied in political messaging, Matsumoto et al. Proposed that these emotions make it easier for an audience to evaluate the targets of those emotions as inherently bad, and thus to make a permanent assessment of the moral worthiness of the opponent outgroup. If satirical images and propaganda images arouse similar emotions, what are the implications for democratic discourse? Dissemination of memes typically occurs within a media ecology of like-minded communities. Their circulation within these groups reinforces political allegiances among members whilst excluding others, diminishing polyvocal public participation. Fidian observes, quote, "The lines between insiders and outsiders used to be clearer in the age when politics' natural medium was print and institutionalized mass media. That seems to be changing in the digital world that has arrived with the new century and allows a proliferation of micropublics much less defined by place or any need to broker a common civility, end quote. Hyperpartisan publishers are perfect examples of the ideological monocultures that Fidian fears may envelop the general public, at which point, quote, satires will only aid an epidemic of emotional confirmation bias that narrow emotional publics in sight, end quote. The ideological or cultural memory of the reader can lead them to infer a contrast of ideals where none is explicitly stated. To a non-partisan reader, a photograph of a slovenly, obese white man holding a Nazi flag presents as mere documentary. To the reader convinced of Trump's enthusiastic cultivation of the white supremacist vote, the image presents a contrast of Democrat and Republican ideals, embodied in a caricature of a Trump supporter. Contrast as disposition form is typically employed by political cartoonists to present two competing ideas within a single frame. The images in this sample typically present a single idea, with the hyperpartisan context in which they are presented implying the oppositional stance. The images can be seen as not simply persuasive texts, but partisan rhetoric. And as in our Breitbart example, we can see similarly the laugh and angry reactions elicited by this image. Of the 72,000 responses, 51,000 were laugh reactions and 8,000 were angry reactions. It is a truism to say that the new media landscape is rapidly evolving, but it's an important one to observe when drawing conclusions about the role of memes in political discourse. At this time, the meme does not appear to have assumed the mantle as teleological successor to the political cartoon with anything like the rhetorical integrity optimistically predicted by scholars and commentators only a few years ago, in spite of the Bernie memes. Breitbart and Occupy Democrats are just two of many partisan groups that have hijacked the form for its spreadable potential, innovated it of its discourse value, and commodified it as propaganda. Memes are not supported by equivalent ethical and regulatory gatekeepers that maintain political cartoons in a broadly trusted and ethical public sphere. Trust is engendered not by editors or regulators, but by group solidarity. And the question of whether it is news, satire, or propaganda is predicated on the reader's cultural literacy. The deplatforming of former President Trump and Pew reports that show increased critical engagement by consumers of news published on social media offer some hope for clawing back the trust deficit afflicting contemporary news media. I contend that this will not restore memes as bastions of the political cartooning tradition, though I don't disagree with Richard Scully when he says that cartooning and meme making will continue as an activity and succeed in finding an audience. But apart from the occasional cartoon controversy, the razor-sharp, intelligent social and political critique that characterizes the best of the illustrative satire tradition has long since ebbed in the public's imagination. And after enjoying a brief golden era of their own, political memes can no longer claim to uphold a similar critical function. Depending on spontaneity and authenticity for their cultural cachet, the commodification and appropriation of meme images for hyperpartisan messaging has seen them become victims of their own success. And yet, the political cartooning tradition has a proclivity for reinvention. In many ways, it is the audiovisual image rather than the graphic meme that best accommodates the moral and ethical ideals of the political cartoon tradition. The abundance of short-form satirical content produced by the stable of late-night talk show hosts, comedians like Sarah Cooper, and incidental amateur video makers such as Isabella Sosa's on-point polemic concerning mask ordinance in San Antonio suggests the future of political satire may not be so bleak after all.